This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Welcome to episode 29 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast, Sketching on Your Travels. Yes, today we're going to talk about all manner of being artistic on our travels, be that drawing, sketching, painting, and so on. And before you shut off completely because you think, oh my goodness, I don't actually have any artistic skill, let me tell you, neither do I. My son, luckily, has inherited a great talent for drawing and painting and all things art from his father. But I inherited somewhat of a lack of skill in this department, and I'm going to blame my mother today, although I think there's no one in my family who was particularly good at drawing. And I know that it's said that anyone can learn to draw, maybe not to paint and to be, really creative, but that drawing is more or less a technical skill and it can be taught. And although I kind of think this is true, my mum always tells the story of many, many years ago, she went to a weekend course, I think it was, called Drawing for Non-Drawers. And she tried very hard, but somewhere towards the end of the course, the teacher did say to her, what do you do for your normal job? Oh, okay, yes, maybe keep doing that. The implication was there that perhaps she was never going to be very talented at drawing. And I feel like I'm kind of the same. But I still do like to do it, and I'll talk a bit more about that as the podcast goes on today. But my first guest, Candace Rardon, can draw, sketch, paint, etc. very, very, very well. I just love her work. She's also good at writing, and this kind of bothers me a little bit because I'm maybe good at writing, but definitely not drawing. And I know plenty of people who are good at drawing and not writing, and to be able to have both talents seems somewhat unfair. But since she's so nice, I will forgive her. And I'm going to talk to her today about exactly some of the benefits that she's discovered from sketching on her travels.
It's funny because for a couple of years before I started sketching, I was already pursuing travel writing. And so I was already bringing little notebooks with me, and I would sit in a square and get my notebook out and, spend a half hour, maybe an hour observing and writing notes in my little book. Not one person would ever come up to me. Nobody's curious when you're just jotting down words. The crazy thing I realized so quickly after I started sketching was the minute you get a sketchbook out and start drawing, it's like moths to a flame. It was incredible to me the way that people would just come up. You can feel them just lingering over your shoulder. And I look up and sure enough, there's somebody there looking at the picture. There's just something about art that is like a magnet to people. And I think, especially with travel sketching, I think the thing about art is that you don't need words for it. And it's a very instant interpretation. If they were to come up and try to read what I was putting in my notebook, it's going to take them time to process that and sort of compare it with what I'm observing. But art is such an instant thing they can connect with. So they can look at the scene on my page, look up at the scene in front of me, and begin to make very quick kind of comparisons and connections between the two. And I love that. People often ask me, does that bother you or does it hold you back? And I think half the reason I do spend so much time in a place when I'm sketching is because those connections have come to be the reason why I love sketching. And so when someone does come up over my shoulder, I'll try to keep drawing for a few seconds because I know that's what they're there to look at. And then I put my pen down and I look up and I'm like, what's your name? Where are you from? What's your story? Because that's somebody I wouldn't have met if I didn't have my sketchbook out normally. And that serendipity to me is such a fun thing to celebrate about traveling and about sketching in particular, the way that it kind of invites you to connect with people that you wouldn't have met otherwise.
Yeah. Oh, that's brilliant. It's so interesting what you say about, writing in your journal versus sketching. And it's, I guess, writing is seen as a very personal, intimate kind of thing. And it would be seen to be far too nosy to really pay too much attention to someone doing that. Whereas art is kind of a more public, almost like a performance in a sense, I suppose. And so it's sort of perfectly acceptable for people to come up and have a look at that.
Yeah, I like that idea. It is like a performance. I think because, I mean, I guess ultimately art is usually intended to be shared.
Yes.
That's the idea of galleries, the idea of museums, of putting it online. So, yeah, I guess there is that inherent sharedness about the experience. Yeah, I never quite thought about it that way, but that might be it. The reason that people just feel compelled to come and get a little look.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? And like you say, because it's visual, then there's no language barrier. So even if you're somewhere where you don't speak the local language, people can still come up and you can have a bit of some kind of conversation about it because there's an opening. Your sketch is the opening of the conversation, I suppose.
Absolutely. Because I do often love traveling in places where I'm not able to speak the language. I love traveling in Asia, especially when I was traveling through Eastern Europe, in Bosnia and Turkey. I'm not often able to communicate on the fluent level that I would love to be able to. And so that's where my sketchbook has come in so handy with that. And that the most important thing I love to communicate through my sketches is that your home matters to me. And I think that when you have your camera out, sometimes you just sort of take these pictures, but the quick photos don't always kind of communicate that to a place. It's easy to move through quickly and take the pictures and keep going. I saw this especially when I was in Bosnia and Mostar, which is a huge tourist destination because of its iconic bridge. And so I would watch these groups of visitors just sort of breeze in, breeze out for the day, very quick kind of momentary experience there. And I loved sketching in Mostar because people would come up to me. I was sitting on a street one day and they just kept coming up and pointing to the different buildings I was including in the sketch and going, that's my home, or that's my store, that's my home. And I hope that what my sketch communicated to them was that I'm trying to honor your home here. It's important enough to me that I would take this entire day to sit on your sidewalk and sketch this streetscape. So that's, to me, one of the big things I've come to love about sketching in places where I can't communicate is I hope that it conveys kind of that sense of connection and that sense of honoring a place that is so important to me.
Yeah, I bet it does. And I bet they're so excited to see that that Mostar is more than just their famous bridge.
Exactly. There's a ton more to it and so many more layers of history and context that are really interesting to delve into. And sketching for me that week was a way to do that. There's the former, I think they called it the fire line in Mostar that separated the two sides when they were fighting. And one of my final mornings there, I literally sat right on the line and sketched this section of two buildings. One had been restored, one hadn't, and it was crumbled and rubbles, and there was a tree growing in the middle of it. And I just thought, I'm literally getting to know this city's history through my sketchbook this week. So it's just something, it's a key for connection on so many levels, on the one level of just getting to meet people, but also in places like Mostar that have such a tenuous, nuanced history. It's a way to kind of plant myself in the history, to get to know it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and the detail that you see by sitting there is so much different to the detail that you see. Even if you're going for a walk and trying to see detail, it's not the same as if you're sitting and trying to sketch it. So true.
Exactly. I just think that sketching is the ultimate slow travel because you're not even slow travel. You are not traveling. You are sitting in one place. And it just forces you to study and observe and look. And I can just sort of feel like when I'm observing a scene to sketch it, I can feel it being burned to my memory. It's there forever.
Yes. You wouldn't even need to look at your sketch again. That just the process of that.
Yeah. Totally don't need to. Yeah. It's crazy. So many moments that I have sketched throughout the world, I can bring up in my head. I just snapped my fingers. I can only in a second. I can bring them up in my mind and tell you the details that are there without even looking at the sketch, because it's just this incredible tool for memory. In addition to being a tool for connection, it's an amazing way to remember your trip and remember the places that moved you and had an effect on you.
Yeah. Oh, it's funny you should say that, because in my my travel journal school, for not for travel writers, but for people who want to keep better travel journals and stuff. I have a unit in it about travel sketching, and I always confess to them and I show them some of my really bad drawings and say, it's okay, this is just for you. You don't have to show the world, but try going out on your trip and just try drawing something, because of that exact reason. Like that's the absolute best way to really remember a place. It's different to any other thing you can do.
Totally. And I couldn't agree more with what you tell your students. I always say to myself, it has nothing to do with the art. Really, in the end, it's about memory. It's about connection. It's about the people I get to meet. The sketch that results from that sketching session is often like an added bonus. I'm like, oh, hey, look, I've got a picture now to show for this. But there's so many other benefits that it yields besides just the artwork itself. So I think, and so that's why when I do meet people who say, oh, I'd love to sketch, but I can't draw, I'm like, that is, I don't accept that.
Well, that's right. Yes. They might not be able to make a living out of it the way you can, but it's still worth trying, I think. So,
yes. Yeah, I'm like, you will still discover a ton of benefits besides, and then you have a sketchbook to show for your trip too, which is just a really fun, it's a fun souvenir. You've made it yourself.
That's right. And it's unique. No one else has that. So,
yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So true.
I think what Candace says about that memory being, kind of burned forever for you when you sit down to sketch something is really, really true. When I was a kid of only 9, we went to Hong Kong. It was my first trip overseas. And I still have my journals from that time. Mostly they're kind of scrapbooks with stuck in postcards and bits of brochures and just some labels. But especially early on in the trip, I have some drawings that I did. And even back then, it is clear that I did not have fantastic artistic talent at all. But there's one drawing that I have in the early pages of that journal of one of the apartment buildings that I could see in Hong Kong, directly out of the window of our hotel. Now, I'd come from super suburban Perth where we all just had a house and a backyard, and I'm not sure if apartment living had even really ever been invented in Perth at that stage. It's a lot more common today. But back then it was really unusual for me to see that, and there were people who had hung their washing out on sort of makeshift washing lines out their windows from these apartments, and it was just completely different to what I had ever seen before. And I sat and sketched it along with numerous TV antennas on the roof. And I can still, as well as being inspired by seeing that picture again, I can still really, really clearly remember sitting there and drawing it and being so surprised by the scene in front of me. And I'm sure that if I had just sat in the hotel, glanced out, been surprised and seen it and thought nothing more of it, then I don't think I would remember that over 30 years later. But having sat down for long enough to draw a fairly detailed sketch of it made a whole lot of difference. So I think even if it's sketches that's not for public consumption, it's just for your own records and your own memories, I think it's something that's well worth doing. And as you heard, Candace had all kinds of other wonderful things happen and connections made by sitting there and sketching. So my next guest has a similar approach to life, I think, as Candace. So this is Aggie Lim. She runs a great blog called Drawn to Explore, and she talks about food and travel. And she's a local Perth girl as well as me. And so in this conversation, I started off by asking Aggie about what happens when she sits down somewhere to sketch.
Usually what I find is that people kind of hover around you. Mm-hmm. And so you get this this field of like energy that someone's looking at you, and sometimes I get a bit self-conscious about it, but other times it's okay. And usually people tend to walk by and say, oh, I like what you're doing. Oh, I wish I could draw. But I hate it when I'm drawing people, because I'm terrible at drawing people. And then they're looking at the people that I'm drawing. I'm thinking, oh God, they're probably thinking, oh, that doesn't look like them. So I tend to avoid drawing people. And if I do, it's usually under the table where I do blind contouring, where I'm not looking at the person and I'm not looking at my page and I'm just drawing whatever, and then it comes out like this really arty-farty kind of drawing, and it's like, yeah, that looks cool.
Oh, that sounds like a good, yes, I can imagine with people looking over your shoulder. I would be extraordinarily self-conscious, but you can actually draw, so that makes a big difference. So if you're not drawing people, what are you mostly drawing?
I like to draw like the inside of cafes and that where there's a lot of stuff. But I also like to draw food. I love drawing food because I'm a real foodie. And, so I tend to draw a lot of food. And if you look at my Instagram account, it's kind of filled with food pictures. But I also like scenery and buildings.
Yeah, your Instagram account makes me hungry sometimes, even though it's not even actual photos. It still makes me hungry. When you think about scenery or landscapes and stuff, can you tell me like a fairly exotic place that you've sat and sketched?
It's funny, when I think of exotic, I tend to think more tropical or the beach. And so because I live along the coast, most of my sketches when I go for walks tend to be along the coast. And I did one yesterday recently where we took the dog for a walk and because my dog's so lazy and needed a rest, so we just sat by a bench and I just did a quick sketch of the ocean and, just the coastline a bit. So I'd say they're my most exotic sketches because I love blue. I love the colour blue and any sort of blue. So, it just kind of makes me feel good.
Oh, that's lovely. Yes. I can imagine that it would be quite a calming thing to do, and it also slows down your day, doesn't it? So how long would you sit and sketch for, like on average?
On average, I'd say probably about half an hour to 40 minutes maybe, depending on what mood I'm in. If I really want to do a detailed sketch, I'd probably sit there longer. But otherwise, sometimes I train myself to do fast sketches and really loose sketches. I tend not to use a pencil outline. I like to go straight to pen, but every now and then I'll use a pencil outline if it's a very detailed sketch. So yeah, and also the other thing is if I'm with people who don't sketch, I either do a quick outline and put colour in later, or I will take a photo and do a sketch later, which I tend not to do much of because I like to sketch on location. But yeah, I don't do a lot of sketching when I'm with people who don't sketch because I feel so rude.
Oh, well, if you're with me, I'm happy for you to sit and sketch and I'll sit and just watch. But I can understand how you feel. It's a bit like going out for dinner with someone. If you're with bloggers, then it's quite okay to sit and take photos and to social media it on your phone and stuff. But if you're out with normal people, in quotes, then it's not so acceptable to do that. And people actually want to eat their meal as it arrives. So it's kind of like that, I suppose.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And if you're sketching people's meals, well, it kind of takes a lot longer than taking a photo. So
yes, that's
yes. So I've done that with my parents because they're old, they're understanding, they're okay if I sketch, but after a while it's like, oh no, I better feed them quick. So,
we really want to eat now.
Yes, I can see the look on their faces. It's like, quick, do an outline, take the photo, do it later.
Oh no, that's hilarious. Okay, I have one more question about the sketching for you. So someone like me who, I know that you shouldn't say I can't draw, but I'm definitely not a good drawer. What's your main tips if I want to get out there and sit down and do a sketch of like a landscape or a building or something when I'm traveling? What's your, like a couple of tips to help me create something that's not really horrible?
Okay, I would say probably the biggest thing that I learned when I first started drawing was to draw bad. And when I first read that, and I thought, what? Draw bad?
I can do that.
I can do that. And then draw bad every day. And I thought, I could do that. I could draw bad every day. So, and not to expect anything and to draw shapes, just to see things as shapes as opposed to a thing. So that's not a house. That's like it's kind of like a rectangle with, a triangle on the top with a little bit on the side, and that bush there, that hedge is like a long rectangle. And, so it's looking at shapes, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, and that sounds simple but makes a lot of sense.
And then when, because I like to add colour, when adding colour, it's and to make it look 3D, it's more about the shading, like where the shadows are. So as soon as you put the shadows in it, the things kind of come to life.
Oh, it sounds so technical, and it sounds like something I'm immediately feeling, oh, I can't do that. But perhaps, yes, if you adopt that draw bad philosophy,
yes,
then perhaps it's possible. I love the idea that by observing that, you'll see things so much more clearly. I think that way, I don't know, if you're somewhere overseas and you see an amazing cathedral, for example, and you sit and try to draw it, you'll actually see like how the building's put together in quite a different way from the normal kind of just have a look at it.
Absolutely. And that's what I like about drawing on location, is that you get a feel for the environment, what's happening, like the sounds around you, the smells, the people around, like you said, the people who stop and have a chat to you, but then also those who just walk past you. And looking at each aspect of what you're drawing really breaks it down. And seeing like the curvature or the ornament that sits right up the top or of the cathedral or whatever it is. But you have, when you look back on your sketches in your sketchbook, as opposed to looking at a photo album, you really remember that experience that you've had on that location.
Yes, I can imagine, because you've really immersed yourself in it. And then, that drawing would really recreate that whole experience for you in a much deeper way.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, that's what I enjoy about it. And even not necessarily having to be away to draw, like, in a different country, but even drawing around locally where I live.
Yes, true. Yes. Another thing that seems
places.
Simple, but I would not have thought to do it. Exactly.
It's like, I've never been there before. I never noticed that. Oh, right. And I've driven past that place so many times.
Oh, I'm sure that would be the case for me. And just that mindfulness, I suppose, even of sitting and taking in things in greater detail than you normally do.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think I really have to take Aggie's advice to heart and go out there and do some bad drawing and a bit more bad drawing. And even if it's just for me, it's such a great way to remember a place. As I mentioned earlier, my son has way more artistic talent than me. And so when we travel, sometimes he'll be very happy to sit down and draw something. And last year, we had a really lovely experience together. We're in a museum in London and we had a bit of time to kill. And we sat in front of a display of, I think, if I'm right, there was some old Ethiopian kind of jewellery and decorations and ornaments. And we sat down in front of it and both sketched it. And it's exactly true what Aggie says, that you're seeing the tiny details of what you're looking at to draw. And I saw that in such a way that I never would have realised the detail in it and, the beauty of it and all kinds of interesting stuff about it that would have been completely lost to me if I had just casually strolled by and had a glance at it. And, of course, my son drew a much better picture than me, but I'm learning to live with that. I'm grateful for his talent, to be honest. I encourage all of you to take a sketchbook with you next time you travel, or as Aggie suggests, you can even do it in your own hometown. You don't have to wait for a trip. You can start some of your bad drawing anytime you want. That's all I have for you today in episode 29. As always, a huge thank you to my lovely guests, and here's where you can find them. You'll find Candace at her blog named The Great Affair, and that's at CandaceRoseRardon.com. If you want to see even more of her sketches, she has a book out called Beneath the Lantern's Glow, Sketches and Stories from Southeast Asia and Japan, and I'll leave a link in the show notes to an Amazon link to buy that book or to have a look at it. It's gorgeous. And secondly, we chatted with Aggie, so you can find Aggie Lim at her blog named Drawn to Explore, and she's at aggielim.com.au. And do have a look at her Instagram account as well. She's very active there with not only gorgeous scenery, but rather a lot of tasty looking food sketches too. And she is aggie.lim on Instagram. I'll put links to all of those things in the show notes. And the show notes will, as always, be at notaballerina.com/29 for this episode. If you want to maybe send me some of your own travel sketches or just commiserate with my lack of sketching ability, then do get in touch. I'm on Twitter at Amanda Kendall. You can use the Thoughtful Travel Pod hashtag. And if you prefer Facebook, then hop on to Not a Ballerina and I will be very happy to chat with you there as well. Thanks so much for listening to episode 29. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.
Jackrabbit FM for your ears.
Who is that? Hi, podcast.